here, it was supposed to be, I began with the varieties of Islamist radicalization, but then I realized that the term radicalization, I mean, when you think it as the opposite of moderation, actually don't mean much. I mean, don't mean as much as we think it means, because if you add the temporal dimension, if you add the spatial dimension, then it becomes a hollow category. What do I mean? At the temporal dimension, when the Islamists are in power, are in the ruling coalition, and when they are in opposition, their strategies will be shifting, although the ideological content does not necessarily change. I'll give examples now. And also, and related to this, it also depends on which country and what kind of institutions those countries have. So I will give some explanation, and I'll kindly ask your ideas about what you think about this more maybe new institutionalist approach to Islamist radicalization that I'm now working on. So on the one hand side, I mean, what's the first and most important thing that we need to understand? I mean, it's the country context. In a Muslim majority country, of course, the arguments, the way the ideology turns into strategies, the elements of conflict, the pillars of alliances, etc., they will change when it is in a non-Muslim majority country. But it doesn't stop there, because, I mean, depending on, these are all categories. I mean, I can understand that when you say, look at secular Muslim majority country, which one is that? I mean, which is not explicitly Islamist, okay? So in this category, the secular one, in this category, you can find Turkey, so republic, secular republic, multi-party regime, and we have lots of theories, right? Like moderation, inclusion moderation theory. Yes, from the beginning in the 1970s, the Islamist parties were allowed to register as formal legal parties, and up until 20 years ago, we thought that it worked somehow because, yes, we had a small Islamization problem, Islamist politics problem, but we never had substantial, big-size jihadist violent groups, okay? There were rare incidents and mostly organized from outside the borders. But that's the just one part of the dimension. This is where the temporal dimension comes into the picture. Because when the Islamists came to power in 2002, especially in their second term, then we started to see what we call as a state-led radicalization. A kind of Islamization which doesn't appear as radical as it is for the people living in that context, but it's radicalization. Because it forces you to change how you think, how you appear in the public space, feel threatened, okay? That grievance, that alienation in your own country against your own people. I think that's one of the worst forms. So how the state, so my point of a new institutionalist approach is needed. How the states interact, especially in these countries, make a change. So another country, for example, think of Morocco, another Muslim majority, multi-party, but this time monarchy, so the institutions change. The Islamist party is the same name with the Turkish Islamist party, Justice and Development Party, Turkish Justice and Development Party, Moroccan Justice and Development Party. You can guess that they have not much to do with the Justice Party, okay? But they have the same name, and there are some relations between the parties, between the movements. But republic, monarchy, explicitly secular, pseudo-secular, I mean, this Moroccan one is pseudo-secular, let's say, and the Islamist party is quite pro-state, even when it is not in power, and pro-monarchy. And we have other examples like Tunisia, let's say in 1960s, and Nahda, despite all the exclusion, so as a challenge to the inclusion moderation approach, Tunisia refused to legalize Islamist party, but Nahda continued to decrease its radical tone for a very long time. I mean, for almost all time. I mean, it even declared its denunciation of Islamist origin and said that it's no longer a party of political Islam, but rather a party who is Muslim democratic. Okay? So we have different examples. And if you look at here, you see similarly interesting examples. For example, clearly Islamist, one party, or let's say, I mean, it's close authoritarian. Can you think of which example is this? Clue, it's very rich. Saudi Arabia, okay? I don't know whether you're following. I don't know whether you're following what's going on in Saudi Arabia, but MBS, the current head of the monarchy, is coming up with, and it's the ideological interpretation of Islam is quite radical. I mean, if there is something called radical interpretation, that is the Wahhabi one, right? I mean, you can also think of the Yemeni, but yes, Saudi Arabia works. And there, what we see is that what has been a very strict theocratic state, monarchy and theocratic, now coming up with policies enabling women to unveil themselves, about to remove male guardianship. I mean, you may say that really in 21st century, are you promoting this? I'm not promoting anything. But for a woman living in Saudi Arabia, or for someone somehow have to stay there, these are vital changes, okay? To be able to walk around without a guardian, as if you are not capable, okay? So, and you see that, again, it comes to the institutions at some point. I'm not saying anything to disregard the importance of the behavioral, cultural, individual, social factors. But I'm just trying to show you that with those, I mean, we shouldn't be doing that at the expense of the institutions. Here, I also have quite interesting cases. What I see here is quite interesting in terms of the fact that even the internal political institutions make a lot of difference. I mean, let's start with the bad case, the autocratic, non-Muslim majority countries. So, I mean, there it's not very diverse. Scattered jihadist groups, sometimes working as mercenaries, changing sides, but sometimes also taking the side of the autocratic regime. Russia, I am talking about Russia. And I'm talking about those once jihadists claiming to remain jihadists but supporting Putin's regime, okay? So, but here, there's quite a different story emerging, right? I mean, in the instances that I looked for majoritarian democracies in Europe, like UK, or thinking of the US, as the electoral system does not enable the small parties, which the Islamist parties will be small, at least now, so will not enable parliamentary access to the small Islamist parties. We don't see that electoralization of the Islamist groups. But when you look at the countries where the electoral system enables electoralization, you see the establishment of so many Islamist political parties. I'll give examples, and wait for it. They are forming an alliance to work together in the coming European Parliament elections. And they are quite the ones that might be a key to untangle these issues at the European context. For example, Nidijn from Netherlands, or probably I will mispronounce them, I apologize from the beginning, but Partido Andalusi from Spain, Dava from Germany, which will be your next big story, as we are in Germany already, Democratic Union of French Muslims, Italian Democratic Islamic Movement. These are political parties which quite fit the theory, as the institutional structure allows them to be visible in the parliamentary politics. They are trying to get to the parliament. I mean, they are now starting at the European Parliament, but many more parties are adding up. Fantastic side is that I made a research, and in 2020, one of the parliamentarians asked a question to the European Commission, asking whether the Commission can say how many Islamist political parties are there in Europe, and the official written answer of the Commission is that we have no idea. But this is a thing, and it's happening. I mean, some of these are apparently groups which are focusing more of a Euro-Islam understanding, so that they are living in these countries, they are Muslims, they have origin countries, but they are not also like them. They are not like the other people here, but they are something which is the new synthesis that should have happened at least a generation ago. But of course, this doesn't mean that all this electoralization and the consensual institutional format necessarily will bring not radicalization, not de-radicalization. Because, I mean, there's also this party in Sweden, Islamist nuance, and it's trying to become formal and legal, and it's quite the textbook Islamist party, I mean, in a negative sense. So why in Sweden we don't see those not radical Islamist party formations, and how come we see it in Spain? Okay, how come we see it in the French case, although it's a country suffered a lot from violent Islamist radicalization? So these are the questions that came to my mind, and I think these are some of the lessons that we can draw for the study of Islamist radicalization at this point. Thank you. And now, should we continue with Rosita?
Yeah.
Okay, I think
Can you?
we will break something, don't we?
Yeah, I know that. I don't want.
Rosita will present, yeah?
Yeah, Rosita will present.
But she needs to.
Rosita, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's not on our side. We can't hear you at all. No, it's not our loudspeaker. Sorry, yeah, we are muted, I think somehow. Or your microphone doesn't work.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
good. I just was saying that I'm so sorry not to be there with you, but unfortunately stuff goes in another direction. But I listening very carefully the presentation by Hasret, that I thanks again for this kind of invitation. And I believe that your presentation, Hasret, even if I didn't hear the presentation before preparing my speech, really resonates with my idea to reflect about Islamist forces in Lebanon. And especially, I believe that two things that you mentioned, 2 points, are crucial in my presentation, and I thank you for providing this point. The first point is context, and the second point is time. Because what I want to try to do today, basically, is to try to reflect about processes of Islamic radicalization in Lebanon, try to look at these processes, not just to focus on the two main Islamist forces present in the country. So, for example, you know, Amal and Hezbollah. But basically, my idea is to try to analyze the path of radicalization, showing how this path of radicalization in Lebanon are quite different from the path of radicalization that other Islamist groups follow in the region. So, reflecting upon these questions, some other questions arise. And for example, why have Islamist groups in Lebanon not achieved the relevance that they have had in other countries of the region, of course, except for Hezbollah, that of course is one of the main Islamist forces in the country. And the other question is how to explain the paradox of that an Islamist group such as Hezbollah, included in many terrorist lists, especially after the outbreak of the war in Syria, had a pivotal role in defending Lebanon from ISIS and other radical groups. And is it possible to explain these dynamics just considering the sectarian divide? That, of course, is one of the main aspects that affect Lebanon. In order to try to answer to this question, I consider time, as I said before, crucial. So I believe it's important to map and to investigate Islamic forces, Islamic groups, looking at the past, and of course then looking at the present. When we look at the Islamist forces in the past, of course, we will see as Lebanon is a country where Islamic radicalization has not followed the trajectories of the other countries in the region. And in a scenario marked by a strong sectarianism, radical Islamist groups have not gathered many forces around them, comparing other groups, other forces. And over the years, the dynamics other than radicalization affected the country. For example, in the post-1967, a period that paved the way for the rising of Islamist groups around the Middle East, Lebanon was excluded by these processes. Why? Basically, I believe for many different reasons that I try to explain. First of all, when Islamist groups became prominent in the region, Lebanon was facing a destructive civil war that would last for 15 years. Before the civil war, after the National Pact, the country was strongly dominated by Maronite forces, and the economic situation of the country, despite several problems that also were generated by the Palestinian presence in the country, was maintained stable the country to incentivize investments and strengthening the bank and financial sectors. In this picture, a prominent role at that time was also played by secular forces, sustained and organized in large and strong leftist movements, parties, trade unions, and associations that played a crucial role in mitigating the role of radical forces, being a solid aggregator and an alternative to them. And finally, explaining these different trajectories of Islamist groups in the country, the presence of the sectarian system, that is a system that strongly controlled somehow the creation of forces that could destabilize the system, such as, for example, the Islamist one. Looking at the past, the situation gradually changes during the civil war that, as said, lasted from 1975 to 1990. It's worthy to note how the radicalization process was transversal and not limited to Islamist groups. And also this speaks to what you said before, Hasret. So radicalization is not just something that affected Islamic groups, and Lebanon, to this regard, of course, is not an exception. And the civil war clearly showed this process of radicalization through the creation of the militia that play a crucial role inside the country, inside the civil war, and that radicalize the groups and also the association. At that time, some Islamist groups surfaced also as a consequence of the ideological impact of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and also of the predication of the Imam Musa Sadr during the 60s. And at that time, of course, we can see the classical division between the two main groups of Islamists, Sunni and Shia, of course, and among the main classical categories of neo-traditionalists and radicals. And just to mention, of course, I have already mentioned among the Shia, Hamas and Hezbollah, and among the Sunni at that time, a crucial role was played by the Islamic Association, the Islamic Unit Movement, the Association of Islamic Charitable Project. I don't have time to go inside the theological and ideological dimension of each group, but it's interesting to note how these groups as inspiration, for example, Nasserism and Nasser more generally speaking, other, for example, were very, very close to some relevant sheikhs that at that time play a crucial role, especially in the northern part of the region, of the country, the region of Tripoli. Other were a mixed ideology and theological approach. For example, the Association of Islamic Charitable Project was very close to Sufi dimension, for example, and to the Abash, the Ethiopians. That is a very interesting case studies, but we don't have time to go inside the case studies now. Coming to the period that we have after the civil war, and of course, when we look at the present, the situation is in the country is very different. In 1997, Hamze, that was one of the major scholars in investigating the role of Islamist groups in Lebanon, recognized that such galaxy, and here I quote, will probably not continue long into the future due to the Islamist lack of unity, the role of Syria, the decline of Iranian militancy, reconstruction efforts by the Lebanese government, and the possibility of a Syrian-Israeli peace. Of course, what was recognized by Hamze was not realized on the ground. And after the civil war and external and internal factors rapidly changed the picture. As internal factors, of course, we have to mention the increasing role of Hezbollah that, however, progressively moderated their own agenda. And also, of course, in 2005, the assassination of Rafik Hariri. And also other two factors that are internal in a way and also external, that are Syria Protectorate that was lasting for all the 90s and more or less, and I say more or less because the Syrian presence in the country is still there, also after the withdrawal of Syria in 2005 after the assassination of the Rafik Hariri, but what scholars call Syria Protectorate ended in 2005, and also, of course, the picture changed a lot after 2011 and the war in Syria. So when it's possible to say that after 2005 we testify in Lebanon a resurgence, a rising in power and in role of Islamist groups. I believe yes, but as I will explain in a moment, this is not a crucial element if we want to investigate and analyze Lebanese political scenario and framework. The of a resurgence of Sunni Islamist groups is linked to the, if you remember, to the siege of Nar al-Bared refugee camp in the northern 2007, when a Salafi jihadist group named Fatah al-Islam occupy the camp that was completely, after the siege, destroyed by the Lebanese army. And why we can explain this resurgence of Islamist groups in Lebanon? I believe that we can investigate this phenomenon through looking at the role of Hezbollah in this overall picture. On the one hand, the policy of marginalization of the Sunni party carried out by the Party of God in the last years, which as is taken in the demonstration of Hezbollah strength that led to the 2010 clashes, and in January 2011 at the fall of the government of Saad Hariri, that was the son of Rafik Hariri, due to the resignation of Hezbollah ministers. And on the other hand, the support that Hezbollah has shown towards Assad Syrian regime since the start of the war in Syria, which has fueled the growth of hostility on the part of extremist groups, Sunni extremist groups, towards this party, but also towards the traditional Sunni parties, considered incapable of taking a clear position on these and other issues. And this is also linked to the fact that many Sunni, as well as Christians, consider Hezbollah responsible for the 33 days war of 2006. Most of these movements that gain in popularity after 2007 and then in 2011, for example, I just mentioned Al-Jamal Islamiyah, Jamiat al-Mashari, or for looking at the more radical one, Arakal al-Salifiyah, Jabhat al-Nusra, that maybe is the most popular and known in Lebanon, or for example, the Islamist groups linked to the Sheikh Yasser inside. All these, many of these movements developed in the northern part of the country, historically dominated by Sunnis, especially from the area of Tripoli, but also in the rural areas such as Akkar and Dimiyeh. And it should also be noted and considered the fact that the northern Lebanon, due to its geographical proximity to Syria, saw the growth of a feeling of hostility during the years of the protectorate, as I said before, and of revenge against Syria hostile to the Sunnis. And this can be considered another element that favored the development of the movement, even more evidently with the outbreak of the Syrian civil war or the Syrian war. Another Sunni majority area where the social group have not taken this represented by the city of Sidon, as I said before. I don't enter into the detail of the theological or, let's say, the Islamic agenda of these movements. Some are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, some other are inspired by Wahhabism, other are Salafist in the many dimensions that we consider Salafists, scientific Salafists, and so on. But I believe that this is not so important for the argument that I want to develop here. But at the beginning of my presentation, I was reflecting upon two main points. The first one is, why have Islamist groups in Lebanon not achieved the relevance that they have had in other countries of the region? And the other one is how to explain the paradox that Hezbollah had a pivotal role in defending Lebanon from ISIS and other radical groups. And trying to explain these trajectories and also the paradox, I believe that radicalization of Islamist groups in Lebanon is not linked to a sectarian competition in theological sense, namely Sunnis versus Shia. And this is testified, for example, by the Islamist affiliation to political coalition that is not necessarily linked to their own sect. For example, many Sunni groups and movements are affiliated to the 14 March coalition. That is a coalition mainly led by the Sunni El Mustaqbal, linked to Saad Hariri, and other reach the coalition of the 8th March, led by Hezbollah. So I believe that this clearly explain the fact that this radicalization process and the radicalization of Islamists is not linked to this kind of competition, and this can help to explain the paradox of a Shia party considered radical that was able and is able to fight against other radical groups, because there are other stances, for example, that in Lebanon are crucial when we talk about radical groups. For example, the anti-capitalist stance or the anti-Israel posture. So, for example, these are unifying causes in a way, in a sense, that of course help us to explain the different trajectories and also the different approaches that Islamist groups had and have in Lebanon. And also, this also can explain, and for me, this is the most important point. I worked a lot on this idea that we consider Lebanon as a system of power, in a way, a sort of authoritarian system. And this argument, this also can explain the fact that in Lebanon, radical Islamist groups did not played a pivotal role in the past and nowadays. And the process of radicalization in the country was in a way contained by the sectarian system. And the system that what I call sectarian system, this system with its oppressive and pervasiveness was and is able to stop radicalization processes in order to maintain the status quo that is necessary to preserve the stability of the system itself, and more generally to maintain the old forces of the elite, political elite, but also religious elite in power. So what we can say as a final sentence about Lebanon, in my view, is that in this country, not just the trajectory of radicalization were different from the other countries of the region, and the role that Islamist forces played inside the country is not so big, if of course the exception of Hezbollah that play a crucial role. But for example, looking at the Sunni side, this was not crucial. And on the other hand, we can say that in the past, leftist movement and forces were stronger and in a way prevent the expansion of Islamist groups. After the end of the civil war and the disappearing, let's say, of these forces, the leftist movement, parties, trade union, and so on, the system itself, so if we consider Lebanon is a system of power and of oppression, and the elite of this system were able in a way to contain Islamic forces and further processes of radicalization. And I believe that if we look at the last 10 years, this argument and this hypothesis can be clearly demonstrated. I don't know if I took so much time, but I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosita. I think we will have a final sessions for questions, right? So can we continue with Tarek? We don't have much time, if it's okay with everyone. Thanks. Thank you, Tarek.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. No, I don't have. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. So today, my presentation is on Turkish Islamism Islamism in Turkey, and my case is Justice and Development Party, AKP. So I think it's better, just to I think it's better to use slides.
You will be standing, right?
Yeah, of course. Like, sorry. So, I have Microsoft Word version. Yeah. So, here I use my dissertation as my case study. Before starting, I also thank you very much to my professor who turned to me as a giant ship from a small boat. So, the Syrian uprising erupted due to the nepotism, corruption and economic problems in March 2011. Although the Syrian public organized peaceful demonstrations, the Assad regime used military tactics in order to oppress those demonstrators. Furthermore, the regime portrayed demonstrations, the Syrian demonstrations, as Sunni jihadists in order to justify its oppression. In response, the religiously conservative Justice and Development Party of Turkey depicted the Assad regime as a Alawite other, who was killing the Sunni brothers in Syria. In that sense, the AKP government sought to adopt humanitarian narratives with a flavor of democratization and political Islam. To oust the regime, the AKP government supported the Sunni-led Syrian groups such as Free Syrian Army and Syrian National Council. Furthermore, it also began its open door policy towards the Syrian refugees who fled from the conflict. Since then, Turkey has been hosting more than 3.5 million Syrians under its temporary protection regime. So, in my case, I have also a theoretical approach. I have three theoretical concepts. The first one, ontological insecurity. The second one, vicarious identification. And the third one, collective narcissism. So here I start from ontological insecurity. So my research question is, why political elites need a conflictual issue with other nations to control ontological insecurity of their public audience? So here you will ask, what does ontological insecurity mean? So the ontological insecurity is having a consistent self and have that self accepted by the others. Furthermore, ontological insecurity equates to the deep, incapacitating state of knowing which dangers to confront and which to ignore, how to get by in the world. In other words, nations need to know who they are as identities or selves. Thus, deep forms of uncertainty threaten their identity security. So we have to know who we are. To search for ontological security, political elites may underscore categorical differences with others in their routines. That is why ontological insecurity, security-seeking political elites may have emphasized and embraced conflictual relationships with others to understand their selves. So the second concept is vicarious identification. My research question is, why did political elites vicariously identify with other nations to feel ontologically secure? So here I use Chris Browning, his definition mainly. So vicarious experience refers to the routine and necessary ways in which people draw upon others' experiences in everyday communication, and not least when trying to establish a sense of their own identity. So vicarious identity can be substituted or understood as interchangeable with the identity of other nations. In that context, vicarious identification relates to actually living through others' experiences as opposed to just drawing on them, and can be identified in those moments when people actually appropriate others' stories as their own, as if they happened to them, integrating them as their part of own biography. So here, in other words, also we can say that vicarious relationships are therefore those in which one thing is taken to stand in substitute for other. So here actually vicarious identification, vicariously identifying with other nation can also create, extended of selves that could also bring to us self-esteem and certainty. I mean, we are Europeans, we are Muslims, we are Christians. So you can use, a nation's actually tragedy and embrace it as your own in order to feel yourselves in self-esteem as a large group identity. So the last concept is collective narcissism. My research question is, how did political elites construct a regional power identity in order to boost collective narcissism within their public audience? So it is very related to Turkish case. I will come later as soon. So here you will ask, what does collective narcissism mean? It is like collective narcissists are assumed to be emotionally invested in a grandeur image of their in-group. This image is excessive and demands constant validation. Therefore, it is vulnerable to challenge from within or from outside that endanger or put into doubt the prominence of an in-group. It is also expected that in-group hostility and aggression are means of protecting the group's image. So collective narcissism is also related to high private and low public collective self-esteem and low implicit group esteem. So collective narcissists may see their groups as extension of themselves and accept everybody to recognize not only their individual, but also the prominence of their in-groups. However, narcissistic idealization of a group may be a strategy to protect a weak and threatened ego. In other words, collective narcissists believe that in their group is exceptional and the others do not evaluate their superiority, or do not accept their superiority. Therefore, political elites constructed their victimized extended self, which can be also vicarious identification, to portray themselves as a protector in order to boost collective narcissism within their public audience. So here I just give a small information about methodology. I collected my data from political speeches of Turkish leaders, from Turkish Grand National Assembly, from their party rallies, mainly the AKP's rallies. So the main, I have the two speakers, two examples of Turkish elites, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Ahmet Davutoğlu, who are the pillars of Islamist foreign policy in Turkey in a decade. So I use critical discourse analysis to understand AKP's vicarious identification and, to appeal to the Turkish public. So here I just have four quotes from the leaders, but we have no such a time. I just read them and come to analysis. So here, President Erdogan said, because we have these speeches, by the way, occurred after the Syrian civil war, when the war was going on. So they tried to adopt, the AKP elites adopted sectarian-led narratives to create to vicariously identify with the Sunni Syrians only. So here he says that because we have 850-kilometer border with Syria, we have kinship, historical and cultural ties. Therefore, we will never be spectators what is happening there. For another sentence from Erdogan, I hope we will go to Damascus as soon as possible and embrace our brothers there. I hope we will read Fatiha and at the tomb of Salatin Ayub and perform our prayers in the Umayyad Mosque. So here, and again, last quote from Erdogan, my brothers, he means Turkish citizens who are mainly Sunni, you open your arms to around 25,000 Syrians. Don't listen to those, he means the CHP, the opposition, who are now trying to expel them, he means Syrian refugees, and you know that they are our brothers. So again, he says, we will be Ansar to serve our brothers. So it's also Ansar Muhajirin dichotomy from the Islamic theology. So here I came to analysis section. So vicarious identification. The AKP government aimed to justify Turkey's open door policy towards the Sunni migrants. In that way, it portrayed Sunni Syrians as brothers, martyrs, in order to underscore shared cultural and religious values between the Turks and Syrians. However, the AKP government also portrayed the CHP as the secular and Alawite other to use sectarian narratives in order to increase the polarization within the Turkish society. Moreover, the AKP officials used the terms such as Ansar Muhajir, Umayyad Mosque, Tomb of Salatin to revive the Turkish Islamic past. They also implied that the Syrian conflict was a religious problem between Sunni self and Alawite other and almost a jihad. That was why it vicariously identified with Sunni Syrians by using their shared Islamic beliefs. So here, in terms of collective narcissism, I say that by vicariously identifying with Sunni Syrians, the AKP government aimed to portray Turkey as a regional power to boost collective narcissism within Turkish public audience. In other words, the AKP considered itself as a protector of Sunni population against the sectarian and oppressive policies of the Alawite-led Assad regime. Indeed, it was a way to justify its interventionist policy in Syria. It also referred to the Ottoman past as a strong nation image in order to highlight Turkey's military and political superiority vis-à-vis the Syrian other. Therefore, AKP government presented itself as the protector of Sunni Syrians against the Alawite-led Assad regime and fighter for Islam at the same time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. So we have the closing speech. I hope we get your questions quite quickly and try to respond as much as possible.
Also to the other...
Rosita, me, and Tarek, whoever you would like. Yes?
I have a question for Rosita. She came here.
She's here, yeah.
Yeah. Hello. So my question is, to what extent the Israeli-Hamas conflict has impacted on these groups, these political parties that you said are not radicalized, as apart from Hezbollah in Lebanon. What is the impact of this conflict?
Okay. Rosita, do you hear us?
Do you hear us? Yes. Okay. Sorry. I looked at this one. Okay. Thank you for the question. I believe that the question is really interesting. In my speech, I stopped more or less in 2020. I didn't mention the time when I finished to analyze the trajectory of Islamic groups, but of course.
Can you please repeat? I think we missed the last part.
Okay. In my speech, I started in 2020, more or less. So, of course, what's happening on the 7th of October is crucial, but I didn't mention the 7th of October for many different reasons, because I tried to provide an overview that stopped more or less when the big economic crisis in Lebanon starts, so March 2020, when the default was declared by Hassan Diab. I believe that maybe the 7th of October can incentivize the rising or the radicalization of some groups, because, as I said, the Palestinian cause has always been an aggregator, not just for Hezbollah and Amal, of course, that play the card, or the Palestinian card, especially as a means to fight against the state of Israel in support of the Palestinians. But of course, we have seen, for example, nowadays in the region of Tripoli, many Sunni groups that are manifesting in the street. We have seen them after the 7th of October. They continue to go to the street, to the squares, in order to sustain Palestinians. And I believe that in the long run, if the crisis continue and will last between Israel and Hamas, they can transform a little bit the picture that I explained before. Also because many radical groups, especially Sunni, as I said, at the ideological level, they are inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood, that of course are at the core of Hamas ideology. So maybe this kind of connection can modify the picture. But I believe also that when we talk about the present, the very recent present, is not possible to make provisions, because as a political scientist, as a social scientist, of course, we cannot foresee the future. even if I believe that if the situation continue to be the same, maybe something can change or can, can be. But, and this is my last sentence, I promise, considering the past and the evolution of these groups in Lebanon, I don't expect a great and new radicalization because, as I say, the political elite and the religious elite are able to control every aspect of the life of their own members, and each of the individuals that are members of these groups are also part of a religious group and a political leader. So I believe that this system, the sectarian system, can prevent the further radicalization processes, even if we cannot see the future.
Steve?
Hasret, I wanted to, we can continue this conversation afterwards, but I couldn't agree more with what you said about the role of institutions and how this works. And I was just wondering if, in your analysis, you would make a difference between sort of representative institutions on the one hand, sort of whether or not there's an electoral opening or whether or not the various legislative or other elected positions are open. Judicial institutions, that is how they're judging in France the whole question of
niqab ban.
Yeah, and the trials around terrorism and Islamism and how that's working out. And then sort of administrative institutions, that is everything from managing migration to perhaps even prison administration, but also just public administration and how it's perceived, public provisions, and so if within institutions you've been interested in sort of making distinctions within and a sort of separation of various powers and how they interact, whether or not having legislative opportunities would change things more than having administrative bodies that are seen as being open to religious groups, as opposed to, especially in the case of France, where that division has played quite an important role. But that's just a question if that's something you find interesting, if it's something you've looked at, or if it fits into your model.
Okay, I didn't look at it yet, because I mean, this is something that's forming in my mind, and I'm doing research on it, trying to see, because I mean, if you start to this time contain everything, then, I mean, then it will not be providing much. But of course, all these institutions would matter, but my, I mean, current impression is that rather than looking every institution or focusing simply on the representative issues, I think, depending on the country context, we should look at the characterizing institutions, those institutions which characterize the functioning of the political system. I mean, in the United States, for example, this might be the federal administrative system that really marks the course of the events, that really affects the trajectory. In France, this might be the judicial system. But I think there needs to be, I mean, if we are going to continue to focus on this, I think we will need to be doing two things: focusing on the institutions, and also in a reiterative process, looking at which Islamist group became prevalent. Okay, so going back and forth, because I mean, this is something not much explored, because I mean, which is normal, because I mean, the way the social science proceeds, approaches certain developments, this is not something that I see that has been done. So yes, I mean, but administrative institutions actually didn't come to my mind. I am more at the part where the future of political Islam in Europe could become electoral, or whether it will become electoral, and whether there will be a reform which which Islam avoided. Okay?
Because in one sense, in France, there's been huge efforts to recruit increasing an increasingly diverse set of civil servants in all fields of the administration, whereas the electoral offering remains extremely limited. So where representation of the state of, let's say, religious minorities is happening is in everything from high civil servants to bus drivers to firemen, or to, right? So there's sort of an interesting, you will find almost no, well, no, I know, but very few Muslim judges, because that's just because of it. And you will find huge numbers in everything from in public administrations, from the highest level public administration to the lowest level in terms of hierarchy of pay, and so there's something interesting because that is one of the ways France is trying to address the problem.
Yeah, but I mean, you also see what is also going on there. Individual Muslims incorporation, trying to incorporate individual Muslims while we are talking about collective behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it will be another thing that needs to be untangled. Yeah. Because then it's part of the propaganda. They are identifying good Muslims, bad Muslims, so they are still leaving us out, okay? It might be even counterproductive.
This is also becoming a citizen of the republic. I already agree that you're taking individual Muslims vis-a-vis Muslims as a group. Ultimately, if you're making civil servants out of a minority, then you are emphasizing the value that they bring to the republic as citizens. So in that case, you go beyond, as the French system assumed, you go beyond their creation and simply the income system. I wonder what would be the Jewish recruitment in the civil service. It's nothing that we study, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But during the interwar period, how do you make money in terms of the Jewish recruitment to the civil service?
Jewish integration? Well, France was the most integrated country.
But I mean, was it also like kind of civil servants?
Yeah, I mean, everything from the prime minister to, I mean, it was considered, I mean, it's the whole history, but it was considered the most integrated in high civil service.
But I mean, what about, the parliamentarians? Was it compared?
So in Parliament, there might have been fewer, but in high civil service, especially in hospitals, who are, of course, servants in France, judges, and in fact, many of the elite.
Are there quick questions, because we need to wrap up? We started late, so if there are quick questions we can get, or we can simply continue before Robin's speech there in the foyer. But okay, last question then.
This is just a comment. I really enjoyed all the presentations, and also had your talk about like the emergence of the parties, radicalism parties in Europe. Similar phenomenon that you have been describing can be also found with the far right and fascist, proto-fascist parties. So that they are all wanting to come to, like they are all interested in becoming part of the party, which is a very interesting phenomenon in itself, that they want to be working through it.
Yeah, they all want to become mainstream.
Yeah, not just mainstream, but like how does that they are contesting the system, but at the same time they are operating through the system.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot there about the behavior of the Islamist groups, radical far-right groups in Europe, the increasing religious tone of the far-right, both in the Muslim majority countries and Christian majority countries. So, yeah, I think there is a lot of things that should be uncovered there as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And let's go and listen to Robin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.